Hello everyone, it is Dr. Rich Schevener back with you for our second to last episode of Get Writ Live. Hope everyone's doing well. Hope you're not feeling the squeeze too hard with finals and all that stuff coming up. So in this episode, we discuss writing as and presenting. Our special guest is Dr. Christina LaVecchia, discussing and presenting the idea of what it's like to present in scientific context, as well as presenting revision in a forthcoming edited collection. So we'll talk with her in just a bit. I'm so excited to reconnect because we went to the same university together at University of Cincinnati. And yeah, it's nice to always find our way back to each other through research conversations and things of that sort. Okay, so before we begin our main topic and chat, as always, I want to discuss a few items because I only get one more shot after this to discuss them. I'd like to once again thank Writing Center Director John Suffren and the Writing Department for supporting another term of Get Writ Live. If you'd like to see any of our past live streams, you can find them in two places, as is tradition now. So we have them on our YouTube page. If you're here on the link and we open it up, you can see that we are live right now, right here. And I don't think it'll play. I'll go ahead and mute it. But yeah, so we're just a little bit behind. But yeah, it's a bit meta, so to say, when you look at it that way. So we have that as well. We also have it linked with all the past episodes right here on the stream too. So, and on the main page where the stream is featured. So you can see that last week we had a wonderful conversation with writing as and intervening in a conversation on lit reviews with Dr. Christopher Morris. I really enjoyed that chat, learning a bit more about his process and what he's been working on. So if you want to see a bit more about what he's been up to with researching Kendrick Lamar, as well as technical communication practices in sort of diversity and equity and inclusion context, as well as how he thinks about anti-racist writing, check that out. It's a fantastic piece. We also have one with Stefan Blanca previously on virtual reality, the kind of trials and tribulations and affordances that come with that. So really great list from this past season, and I'm sad that it's just about over. So today we have one on writing as in presenting, and then next week we're talking about writing as in composing yourself. So feel free to stay tuned. As well, if you're looking at this on demand, you can find all the links in the description below to past episodes and resources concerning today's topic. Also, the Writing Center page. I can't say that enough. We have all kinds of different links here. When you're in the Writing Center, for example, or if you're approaching the time to start working on those exams and finals and things like that, certainly my classes are in the thick of that now. Remember, you can always sign up for one-on-one sessions that are free and open. We have drop-in sessions. We also have ones that are for one-on-one appointments that you can make ahead of time. So usually we are full up near the end. So if you haven't booked one just yet, please go ahead and do that. And then if you want feedback on any writing assignments, whether it's from brainstorming to putting on the final touches of an essay, check out a one-on-one session. Super helpful. We also have an accessibility specialist, like I said, drop-in sessions, as well as other workshops. In fact, today is a very busy day for us here at the Writing Center. We have one going on right now on revising your sentences. So if you want to go over to that one, I won't be offended. It's a great workshop on revising works at the sentence level. And then we also have other workshops that are not listed here, but are available otherwise, whether it's multilingual studio, so on and so forth. Okay, so we have those. Lots of things to think about, but today we're going to focus on what it's like to write as and present. What does that mean, right, for us? Now, the reason why I always bring this up near the end of the term in different ways, whether it's like presenting in multimodal forms or doing something of that sort, is because usually at the end of a term, we have some kind of major presentation. Also, a number of scholars, like myself, presents at various conferences, right? We are in the springtime, usually after doing a lot of work throughout the year. We're coming together at conferences such as what's called the 4 C's. So it's Conference on College Composition and Communication. Students in my department, in the writing department, and part of the Professional Writing Student Association are working on a symposium right now. and working through how to present and deliver these really interesting talks and critical works across creative nonfiction and ideation and so forth. So there's a lot that we have to think about when we're presenting. And the real question that we're thinking about today is, how do we present complex ideas to public audiences and peers? What form would best serve our content? A slide deck, a video, a podcast, a website? So before we bring on our special guest in about 10 minutes, I want to discuss some quick ideas about presenting, just to recap kind of where we are and to see where you are, what has worked for you. So the first is what we might think of as an alternative to PowerPoint and Google Slides. Certainly those are standard practice in presenting, right? Like if we are giving a proposal to an idea or synthesizing a seminar paper in the form of a presentation, we might be turning to something familiar, which is, again, I don't even have to pull it up because you know what I'm talking about. Microsoft PowerPoint, Google Slides, they're one in the same, essentially. They have some more flexibilities here and there. They both have some affordances that are different, but largely standard fare, traditional presentation through a slide deck. I want to call your attention to this one, though, which I find very interesting. It's called Slidescom. So it's there's a free sort of program along with this, but as you can see here, just on the screen to the right, because I don't want to sign in or anything like that, and I'll tell you why in a moment. There's a bit more interactivity and coding you can actually do behind the scenes to make some custom slides. The interesting thing about this one is that, like its counterpart, which I'll show you in a second, you can make it essentially go from left to right, like in the horizontal format you would see with, the traditional sort of slide deck software and applications. But in this case, you can also do vertical. So if you want to deliver your talk, you want to sort of have the outline as, say, horizontally, but you want to deliver it vertically to dive deeper into an idea or something like that. You can do that. So there's all kinds of different templates that they present that you could sort of work with, and it's largely this kind of framework. So it gives you like a progress bar as you go, so that kind of helps your audience and your readers as well. And there's lots of ways to resize and customize it all in the cloud. So there's a free sort of version available to you for that. Lots of different ways you can work with stuff, just as you would with one of the slide decks. So again, you can see many different ways to deliver this. Now, this doesn't require much coding at all. If you want to try something a little, I'll just say spicier, we'll just say that. There is a counterpart to this called revealjs.com, and it's up here. I think it's linked also with the slide deck link that I presented to you all. So you can see it's the same kind of concept, but what you can do with this, once you download this, you'll have to use like a web editor and text editor that way that I've discussed in previous streams, such as Brackets or Atom or something like that. You can make an HTML presentation with Reveal. And what I love about this, is you have this, you can put it like onto your website or onto some kind of cloud service. But vertical slides, this is one of my favorite things to do. So if we're looking at the vertical slides, we can see that we could go as deep as we want to. And then they advertise here that it's with slides.com if you're interested in doing something of that sort. So when I've given presentations, oftentimes if I'm describing, let's say like methodology, this is what I did, this is the sort of steps I took, I can deliver that here at the top of the horizontal slides, and then the vertical ones can dive deeper into each step of the process. And in fact, I think if they actually I forgot you can do this too. The nice thing is with the Reveal.js, and I think with Slides.com, is if you push the escape key, you can see your entire outline. So you can zoom in and see essentially like a map of how you want to deliver your talk. So again, let's say this is a still image or something of that sort on a particular finding, but then you want to offer some videos at the basement level. It just kind of unlocks some different ways of presenting and delivering information. So highly recommend this. there are tons of different tutorials out there on how to use this, and in my experience, it's worked very well on mobile as well. So maybe I can link to my example of how I've coded that for a recent talk. I find that I get a little bit more control, and I can get kind of creative with a well-worn form, which is slide decks. Okay, so the others that I'll come back to after our chat are the following. Adobe Express, I have talked about this a number of times, and this is becoming even more accessible for users. So Adobe Express is part of the Adobe Creative Cloud and Adobe's suite of creative tools for digital communication purposes, content creation, social media channels, etc. So Adobe Express, with it being free, all you need is a Adobe ID. Usually you can tether that to one of your accounts, such as your email, or to Google. That's a standard fair way. This is tied to my actual account that I have for my classes and so forth. So as you can see here, it's about the same. I've got like the premium part, but it's totally free. I think the idea of this is to give you a taste of what you could possibly do with the fully available programs, such as Premiere Pro and Photoshop, so on and so forth. And all the options you have here for delivering your content. You can make an Instagram post or one that's in that style without actually putting it up onto Instagram. So if you're trying to prototype an idea for a project, you can do that. You can make web pages. What I'll show you after our conversation today are some of the projects that students composed for our digital composition prizes that were through things like this. So maybe your essay is best served as a web page, one web page delivering all the information in an interactive sort of way. And it might be a good way to sustain your project so that you can work through like a presentation in that form as well. And they also have all kinds of different options, converting things to GIFs, making videos and so forth. I will admit the video, I'll show you here. They give you some, basic templates and so forth. It doesn't have a lot of options for doing this, video editing that is. But if you're trying to just convey an idea quickly, and you're recording it, you want to record it right on the fly, get it out there, to kind of preview a paper or to give like a fire talk or a quick talk as part of a class. I think this is a good option, especially just if you're getting into and wanting to refine your skills with video editing. So link that for you as well. That's in the description. Feel free to check that out. Again, we're kind of thinking what's possible. I've mentioned this one a couple times too, but I think it's always worth bringing it back, is Headliner. That is largely for making like audiograms and short videos based on podcasts. And you can see that there's a pattern here for all of these. They're in the cloud. We're trying to do something that we can access in the cloud across devices, whether it's our phone, laptop, or school computer. We've got a lot of options here. What this allows you to do is, as you can see, like with this case, I was working on like a template for a sound abstract that I was working on for a project. And very simply, what they let you do is put in the audio here in a waveform. You can put in text, and then you can put in media. So all kinds of different options you have there for you to work with. And I can't recommend this enough. Like you can see this kind of campy thundercloud I've got behind me, things like that. But if I simply just delete it, I've got some options there. Let me see if I can delete this. It's telling me I can't. I don't know why, but it's my project. That's odd. Okay, but you can see how I can replace it with, any kind of thing that's free and open to the public, and videos. For example, on Pixabay, I can type in like awesome, and we'll see what happens. So I could change it to this, and for you doing something like a seminar paper and wanting to extract a part of it for a presentation, this might be an effective way of doing it. Now, of course, it's going to load this video, so it may take a couple minutes. Maybe we can come back to it. But that's essentially what I'm talking about. These are quick ways of rendering your content into, and even complex ideas, maybe into multimedia forms. Right? If you're trying to explain a theory, for example, what would that look like? Okay. So we'll chew on that for just a minute. But for now, we're already like at 11:45. This is amazing. I'm going to say a couple words about our guest, and then I'm going to bring her on. So I can see you there, Christina. We'll bring you on in just a second, and then we'll have a little chat. So I've run through some ideas of what you can think about with presenting, complex information for public audiences. But I was really interested in bringing in Dr. Christina LaVecchia, because she has a lot of experience with that, especially working in and outside and with academics and scientists and so forth to deliver the really, really interesting, useful information for patients and so forth. Let me turn that into a little bit of a bio here. So we're going to have a special guest chat with Dr. Christina LaVecchia. Dr. Christina LaVecchia is an assistant professor of English, discipline-based education research at the University of Cincinnati. It's my alma mater too, so excited to talk with you for that reason, among others. She contributes to the cross-disciplinary pedagogical research, particularly focused on first-generation college students, and teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in first year in intermediate writing pedagogy, writing across a curriculum, or WAC as we say, and rhetorics of health and medicine. So her research spans multiple disciplines. Her work focuses on contemporary composing theories, writing pedagogies, invention, digital literacy, and professional practices. And she's currently co-editing a volume on revision practices called Revising Moves, in which contributors tell stories about revising and its impacts on their work, identities, and everyday lives. So, full disclosure, I'm part of that collection. So excited to see it come out. Her published works in rhetoric and composition appears in College English, Composition Forum, Patho, the Journal on the Assembly of Expanded Learning Perspectives on Learning, if I've got that right, or JAEPL. I'm butchering this. I'm so sorry about that for everybody. And she's also a research collaborator in the Knowledge and Evaluation Research CUR unit at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. There she uses her training in rhetoric and writing to research patient-clinician communication and care, which we'll talk about in a bit. That is individualized to meet patients' values and preferences and fits their lives. So excited to welcome you on, Christina. Let's bring you on to the stream. Hello, friend. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm thrilled to be here. And my voice sounds funky because I've got a toddler in daycare. And so I'm on the tail end of a wicked, wicked cold.
I know the feeling. They call it sometimes they'll call it the kindergarten crud, and things like
exactly.
that, or crud. So happy to have you with us regardless. And it's just so nice to reconnect, like in the visual form. We've talked a lot over the past year on email about the edited collection and so forth. Yeah. So and congrats on your recent position at UC. It's so exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm thrilled to be back at UC. For those who don't know, I went to school with Rich. We moved to Minnesota, and that's where I started working with the care unit at Mayo Clinic. Then I took a WAC directing position in the Philadelphia area, and here I am back in Cincinnati now.
Yeah, I never imagined finding my way back there. I mean, it's a dream, right? It'd be a dream to my in-laws are always saying look at UC. There's always UC. I'm like, I know, but it's so cool. So okay. So you started in January, right? Or was it?
Literally this past January, because I had gone back remotely to the care unit, and when I left my WAC directing position. There was actually a hot second where I was imagining maybe I'm just going to build a career in healthcare and try to do that, work up from a postdoc position. And I saw the position at UC, so I delayed my start date so that I could finish out some research on a project that looks at patient choice with anticoagulation, taking blood thinners if you have atrial fibrillation, because that's heart condition that predisposes you to strokes. And so often it's recommended for many patients to take blood thinners, but patients are kind of understandably nervous about that. And so there's a lot of conversation that goes into that. And so that'll probably touch on some of the stuff that we'll talk about later.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, your record of, working with the Mayo Clinic and then writing across the curriculum and now at UC, it's just so impressive. And, you're actively like editing and researching. I was just wondering, like, if we could start off talking about your habits of writing schedules and things of that sort. Like, what's worked for you as you've sort of transitioned and moved between different, positions?
One thing that really saved me when I was, out of field and still trying to publish in field, as well as alongside my out of field work, and also when I was directing that WAC program, which was not only the WAC program, but also embedded in that was first year writing, and then was teaching on a 3-3 with highly at-risk students. So it was a lot. So collaboration has just been so key. I mean, it's part of my ethos anyway. It's just what I love to do. But it's kind of the only way I get work done sometimes, because I'm a people pleaser. And so being accountable to other people just really kind of helps me to keep pushing. And I'm still adjusting and still trying to tweak those habits, especially with parenting, eating up a good chunk of my days now. So I try to see small blocks of time as possibilities for writing, and not only, those long blocks. And those are important too. And I try to occasionally schedule those into my schedule and protect them. But just being able to see a 20-minute, expanse of time as like I could throw some stuff down on the page and come back to it later has been really helpful.
Yeah, it's like the Pomodoro timer, that 25 minutes, just enough to carve out some time to look at it. And
I try to. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please. Yeah,
I get excited and I jump in. Sometimes too, I kind of start daydreaming, and then I like, that's the thing I could put in this, and then I just try to like jump on over and drop it in, and then go back to the other thing I was doing too. So kind of try to like follow the wanderings of my mind too, and take advantage of being in that moment of like, I've got an idea. Absolutely.
And I just to jump off that, like, it's parenting, I think it's I just, every time I have a second, sometimes, I do have boundaries, right? I've had to, like, I think that now that my son is in sort of elementary school at this point, grade 1, and I just say, okay, this hour I have, I'm going to make it work. I'm going to, exactly. That hour is going to be super solid and productive. But I think before I could just kind of keep it pretty open, okay, I have a plan, even if it's just daydreaming. For an hour, I'm just going to daydream. That's it,
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you've got the like deadline of like, oh no, they're coming home from school, or I have to go pick them up from daycare, or whatever it is. And then you say, I gotta go. Or like, there's nothing like trying to write during nap time. Like on the weekend, if I decide I'm going to try to do something during nap time, it's just like, okay, I gotta buckle down. I've got to get it done. I only have like an hour and a half, and then he's gonna wake up.
Yeah. Well, how about that? Yeah. And I love that you mentioned collaboration, like for you being part of this habit is to work with folks. I think that's been a real resonating point for me in the last few years, especially with pandemic and just trying to hold each other or support each other in different ways. Just, I think they just unfolded in ways I didn't imagine at first, after talking a number of times with my peers on Discord and random Zoom meetings and articles. Just kind of ideas just revealed themselves in different ways. And just seeing all of in your CV, you've got so many good collaborations in there too.
Yeah, well, science is all highly collaborative. It's weird and not really, like, people go, what? If you have a single author publication, people don't really know what to do with that, unless it's like, this really short, like, editorial piece or something like that, because the work's inherently collaborative, and that's what makes it better. And Care Unit was kind of structured, I like to say, kind of like a spunky startup. Like, it was like in one room with like shared desks and no privacy at all. And so, but that was really great for like getting stuff going. Like, the ideas just move so fast because if I got stuck and if I was sitting alone and I'd kind of stew about it, I'd just kind of turn around and say, Natalie, can you help me think through this? And it would just go. I kind of loved that, so the trade-off was you didn't have your own space. There was no closing door, but, and you spent a lot of time with your coworkers. So we, they always kind of really, I think part of their vetting process was like, will you vibe with us? Like, can we be in a room with you? But it was really, really just like wonderful and energetic for just seeing stuff just like rocket off the ground.
It's like a writer's room and the medical context.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
I know we were going to talk about that a little bit later. Do you care? Do you mind if we sort of transition to talking about working with that unit and so forth? And
that makes sense since we're kind of talking about it.
Yeah, we can pull up I wanted to ask you just a bit about like this piece and some of the other stuff we were talking about before the show and so forth. But I mean, let's see, this is shrinking up a little bit. I don't know why that's doing that. You get to see the live broadcasting that happens when you are doing a program and doing it all by yourself. So
I mean, the production value you bring to this conversation, Rich, is very impressive. So I'm just along for the ride.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'll get this back up in just a minute. But so I mainly want to ask you, tell me a bit about, or can you tell me a bit about writing in these scientific contexts? You mentioned being in the room with, with others and vibing with them. And then, presenting in what's often called like the Imrod format, right? And intro methods, results, and discussion. I mean, what has that experience been like for you? And maybe we can talk about that in the context of this piece. Yeah.
So the assumption that I kind of brought in that I think is really like a common attitude in the field was like, oh, well, I'm going to be the one that helps them with writing because clearly they must be struggling with writing. That's where my expertise is. And that's going to be the way I help them. I mean, I'll say too, just for context, when we were living in Rochester, my husband was doing his residency and I was looking for positions, so I was applying in field, but I also saw that there was this research unit doing really cool work that sounded kind of rhetorical. And it turns out I was right. They have a designer with a philosophy background who had some rhetoric training.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, neat.
So they were looking for a qualitative researcher, and the threshold for expertise was very I could manage it, because I wouldn't have branded myself in field as a methodologist in qualitative empirical work, but they were the requirements for the position were you took a method seminar and and I'd gone to Dartmouth and I could talk about a few other experiences I'd had. So I came in thinking, all right, well, I'm feeling real impostery about the qualitative research stuff, but at least I'm a writer and I can do that. And you know what? Scientists are really highly rhetorical. They're really, I mean, when they get to, especially, at least when you get to be a senior scientist, you're directing a lab, you're an investigator, you are agile at writing for multiple audiences and knowing how to pitch things. In part, if you think about it, all of their, a good chunk of their money, if not most of it, comes from grants. And that's how you write things. And so they're really used to making arguments for the value of their work and doing it for, a range of audiences because you have agencies and foundations and internal things. And in healthcare and medicine, there's kind of a lot of different, like the STEM fields, there's actually a lot more siloing than we see from the outside in humanities. So, because there's clinical research, and then there's healthcare delivery research, and then there's basic science research. And the folks in those three areas don't necessarily have expertise in the others. And so being able to, pitch to like these different kinds of audiences also just takes a lot of skill. So they're just doing so much of the work that we do in the discipline. This semester, I'm teaching a WAC seminar, a WAC WID seminar, and I had students read this book by Lisa Emerson. It's called The Forgotten Tribe, Scientists as Writers. And what I appreciated was that she conducts these interviews with a range of scientists and essentially, Oh, great. Yeah, it's a great book. I'm not a huge fan of the title, I'm gonna say, but I think it's like from another context because she's in New Zealand. So I think that's part of it. But she has these great like literacy narratives that show how highly rhetorical and how much these folks are and how much writing they really do. The biggest difference is one that this and this was absolutely what I found through my experience, is that a lot of their writing knowledge is tacit. They don't necessarily have the language for it. So actually what they most appreciated maybe was my just being able to like identify and describe what they were experiencing as writers. And that was absolutely my experience as well as a writing across the curriculum director. You know, we were starting a brand new program at my institution and faculty didn't necessarily have, I would say, well, what kind of help do you need? And they couldn't identify because they were just like, I don't know, I need help teaching writing. And so if I was able to say, well, maybe you want help, you know, scaffolding, you know, with drafts and process, maybe you want help conducting, facilitating peer review, maybe you want help responding to student writing. And once I started breaking it down, they're like, oh, okay, like that was helpful, right? The same experience with writing. Folks had like kind of like a sense for things, but they're not talking explicitly about writing very often. So our terminology and ability to talk about it explicitly was helpful, as was my teaching skills were really valued because scientists don't get a real great like systematic approach to education with their writing. It's really something that's more of like an apprenticeship model. And so it was helpful that I was able to help mentor some of the trainees who are coming from clinical backgrounds, but there to do some research. So, you know, they had an MD or they had a foreign equivalent. There's an MBBS as well from some countries. They didn't have a PhD. They didn't have research experience all the time, or sometimes they had some, but they may not have like a writing background. And so my ability to mentor those folks was really, really valued as well.
That's great to hear because I think that we often think like the road is just go to professorship or grads, you know, go on to graduate studies, but there's a real value in writing specialists. I think even as, you know, I remember my undergrads are finishing up this term and they're doing digital content creation, and I'm like, you could help these, you know, domain experts, knowledge experts, like or clinicians and so forth, render this like into, you know, some digestible like public information that, and just like, oh, I can do that. Really? Yeah. Like, yeah, you like they draw on you as an expert in that domain. And it's a friend of mine was a journalist for a very long time with the paper and ended up working for Children's Hospital right from there because she was really good at storytelling and had that skill set.
There's strangely a really high value placed on storytelling in science, which feels, I say strangely because it seems on its surface to be a contradiction, right? Like scientists, but storytelling, because like, you know, like for instance, I started running some workshops for the other postdocs at Mayo actually, as well, where when I mentioned to the folks running like the equivalent of like the grad student organization, it was like the postdoc organization. I met them at a welcome lunch, you know, it's like free lunch, great. And hey, by the way, I'm from writing studies. I teach writing. They're like, oh, we get so many requests for writing workshops. Want to run one? I was like, okay. And their conception of a writing workshop was a dimmed lecture hall and like broadcasted to other campuses and like present on writing. That was a workshop. But, gosh, what was they saying?
Yeah, but they wanted you to present. Yeah.
So they wanted me to present. Gosh, I lost it.
That's okay. It's that daycare.
I know exactly right. It was the thing I was going there before, the presenting, teaching writing. Oh, I wanted to title it like, you know, something writing or writers in the title, and they said you have to call it scientific writing or scientific writers. I was like, really? Isn't that just like understood? They're like, no, it'll scare them off. People won't come. And Emerson's book also validated this, that like she would ask them like, do you consider yourself a writer? No. But then she would ask them a question like, tell me about a specific thing you just wrote. And then they like tell it, you know, like they give it an answer that made it clear they're a writer. They just don't have that personal identity. They see it, even though they see like writing as important to science, they kind of have this separation at the same time. It's funny, but the storytelling thing in science, they've just really taken it it's just a metaphor, basically. It's not that like they want to bring in imagery and like flowery prose. It's more that it's a really helpful metaphor for them to think about, like setting something up and having like a protagonist of some kind, and like what they're, and focusing in on like one aspect of the data for this project, those sorts of things. So it becomes this mechanism for talking about writing more than it's actually about like it has nothing to do with what you teach in a fiction workshop.
Okay, yeah. And I was just thinking, like, storytelling, kind of, I'm always wondering, especially like even in my own work, and I wonder how this sort of has come up in some of the work that you've been doing recently, with these I would say this kind of cohort or demographic of writers, is we look at this sort of Imrod format, right? Like I think that sometimes when I'm writing in that results section, I want to tell like more stories, and I find just getting kind of I find that accepted format, it sometimes doesn't leave a lot of room for that storytelling. But like I'm just like, oh man, but that's pulling on like my heart. I really want to, like, can I narrate just this one case of this particular writer or participant? And I don't know. I was looking through. Go ahead.
I just identify with that as being, there's actually a lot of things I've come to like about the Imrod format, but the constraint that I will just always chafe at is the separation of results and discussion. Although I'll also say I think that the degree of separation that's expected there is contextual. For instance, there's a lot of social scientists who work in medicine. There's social science like journals that are in fact, there's one called Social Science in Medicine, SSM. And it's, I think, a little bit more accepted to have a small degree of like interpretation that comes into the results there versus something very quantitative. It's literally just like bare bones description of the stats, and then your discussion is where you contextualize it. This paper we're scrolling through now is a qualitative aim of a large study focused on cost conversations in care. So there were a few papers that preceded this that looked at whether shared decision making, which is a mode of care that values patients' input, their values and preferences, and lets that help guide the decision that's made. So the decision is a shared one with the clinician. Whether shared decision making had any effect on the incidence of cost conversations in this random sample of videos we pulled, because we've done a lot of video studies. So this was a retrospective look back at a random sample pulled from multiple studies that we had that were video recorded. There were a few other quantitative studies, and then this was the qualitative one. And what we're looking at now, this enormous table, is how you get around the short word count for qualitative work, which is you throw all your direct quotes into a table, because the tables usually don't have limits, just the number of tables are limited. And so that you can throw your quotes into a table and then just like parenthetically reference them in the text.
So this is interesting because I feel like, at times when I want to pull out a long passage to like contextualize a story or a finding, it's not, I have trouble like bringing that stuff in. And the fact that they endorse this approach to show like a really robust transcript, is it just says something to me about like narration and bringing life to just to results, really. Just a comment, really, more than anything. But absolutely. So we've got this piece, and you've published a number. We could see how collaborative this already is, with who, like, across different institutions. Super interesting. So outside of sort of manuscript preparation, like, another aspect I think that I find very interesting is just rendering this for public audiences as sort of presentations and formats and things like that. I guess just to pivot, is one question I had put to you ahead of this is, how would you describe the value of presenting research like this, or even and maybe in another context, if you want to speak to that, to peers and to public audiences, trying to distill something like this qualitative study into like a public kind of format?
Yeah, I guess I haven't presented on this work as much as I have my rhetoric and composition work to a public audience. Yes, and so for instance, the workshops and talks I've given, because also a lot of research groups have like a weekly talk. They have this huddle, and it's it's more informal. Sometimes huddle is, just like a chance to check in with everybody, but sometimes it's like an academic huddle where you can bring in a guest speaker, or you can have one of your own lab members present something they're working on, or like practice something they're about to do.
Yeah.
So I've done a lot of that, done a lot of faculty workshops, which feels kind of like presenting to the public in a way, right? Because then you're taking what we know, but trying to distill it down to like the value of it beyond like a field understanding of like, this advances theoretical conceptions of writing. It's like, no, this is how you can teach writing in your classroom. But also too, like presenting at conferences and stuff. I just really like how when you present something, it gives you a chance just to really get this immediate feedback, just like from the, body language in the room, what's resonant and what really speaks to people. And for me, I always end up expanding on my prepared remarks, and the conversation is always richer than the one I imagined in my head. And so for this reason, I'm really trying to move more and more towards talks when I present work. And I say this because with in-field conferences, often we read papers, and I do it a lot. And I think there are times when it's called for, but I just love like the back and forth and like expanding in the moment. And it's something I've really, like, COVID has really highlighted how much I've missed it. I didn't present actually, but I just went to my first in-person conference since COVID, and it was a thrill to go back to C's. I was in Chicago for the 4Cs.
It's enlightening. It's like, what I've lost I've missed this so much.
Yeah, exactly.
That was nice. So there's a way of delivering that. I think I've just lately have had like the kind of script more just for like the nerves to myself. I've got to be able to kind of refer to these things, but it's also just try to make it like a real embodied performance, and it's sort of like I want to draw your attention into these ideas, but I've got to pick something that's you can chew on after like 10 minutes of talking, and what do I want to take them. What I want to leave them like sort of thinking about. But workshops, I hadn't considered when we were talking about this as its own kind of, public format for bringing people together and
I hadn't thought of it until this moment to illustrate my point that I expand on the moment. It's therefore richer.
And I think that's interesting about workshops is like sometimes when I do workshops on campus, like it is more of just me speaking and like asking questions, but like I think that's sort of what has been accepted by a lot of folks. I'm just going to take in the knowledge, but that interactivity is really key for, I think, even just building like an understanding about like complex ideas.
Yes. And that's I felt that too, because the workshops I've facilitated have very often there is a lot of presentation of knowledge, because that's what folks came for, to learn something new. But I try to so with those scientific writing workshops that I did, so it started as there's like a monthly talk for the postdocs, the workshop, and so that kind of felt like a lecture, but I just tried to make it as active as possible. So I picked the concept of flow for my first topic, because it's just one of those evergreen metaphors, and it transcends discipline. They talk about like they talk about it everywhere, and so I tried to like pause after I'd introduce something and bring in an example and put like something up on the screen and ask them to turn and talk to a neighbor in the lecture hall and share an idea, things like that. So I tried to get it a little active, and like a faculty workshop, it's here's my information. Here's my information, then let's have a long conversation, or let's take pit stops every couple slides and have you share and reflect how this like intersects with like the teaching that's been going on in your classrooms. Because although WAC was brand new as a program, you know, a lot of the work of writing across the curriculum seems to be getting, just like we want our students to realize that the multitude of literate practices they undertake are actually writing practices in their daily lives. Faculty teach writing more than they realize across disciplines. And so getting them to see like, oh, but you've kind of been doing some version of this for a long time, and, you know, building their confidence in that way is kind of a good chunk of the work, I think.
Yeah, it's when my father, for example, I hate writing, and then I talked to him the next day about like his documentation that he was working on at General Electric, and he's like, oh yeah, I just helped, you know, design this new or revise this new sort of set of procedures for you know, a jet engine and so forth. Or his friend, who also says he hates writing, is very skilled at writing like failure analyses and so forth, but he doesn't tie that to writing like with a capital W. It's very it's
exactly like what I was reading about in Emerson's book. I did the thing where I interrupted you again, because again I was excited to be like, yes.
Hey, we're writing fans. It's all good. Yeah, no problem. Yep. Well, I'm gonna do a bad transition, but I think I'm gonna get you there. We're talking about metaphors and so forth, kind of. But you know, we started in the space of the writer's room with you at Mayo, and then we've talked about like workshop spaces to work this out. But I want to take us to another space, I guess figuratively or literally, to, you know, a more sort of inside the hospital and other sort of situations when clinicians are talking with patients. This is what your research was about that we were looking at. And I wanted to ask, like, what do you think are some best practices, like in those moments when patients are meeting clinicians? And as I was telling you, like, my wife's a nurse, she has to present and call a lot of people to tell them information that is hard for them to hear sometimes, you know, and whether it's in person or it's over the phone. So she's kind of the middle person with patients and doctors and other experts. But just a long-winded way, like, what do you think are some best practices based on what you've researched and been involved with? Yeah.
So the research unit, the Knowledge and Evaluation Research Unit at Mayo, a lot of our work is on shared decision making and on helping patients manage chronic conditions. So shared decision making, as I mentioned before, is about, it's kind of like a correction to the paternalistic model of care that is, I'm the doctor, I'm going to tell you what we're doing, the end, see you later, do you have questions?
I see. Yeah.
And so instead building in a discussion, an interaction. And I should say too, that's kind of our unit's conception of what shared decision making is. There's a lot of ways people talk about it. It's been codified into like, you know, outcomes and reimbursements and like, you know, like shared decision making gets talked about a lot and sometimes in different ways. But the way we see it is this is inherently about a humanistic interaction. And I think that sometimes we see shared decision making as informational. Like we just, the initial assumption was provide patients with information and give them choices and that'll fix everything. And then we are, you know, the very smart folks I have had the pleasure to work with came to the realization, you know, designing these decision aids, which are tools that are sometimes used with decision making. They don't inherently make it decision making, but they're sometimes used to support shared decision making. They designed these tools. They would run. Yep, you can go ahead and pull them up.
Yeah, okay.
They designed these tools, would run trials on them, and they discovered, you know, information isn't what fixes it. Patients don't need information. They need a caring relationship. They need conversation, and they need care. So it's not just about information and choices. Those things are important. Like it's important to explain things because obvious reasons. And it's best when patients get some kind of choice, but just providing those things and throwing them at a patient saying, see you later doesn't do it. Right. And like our work with that qualitative piece on cost echoes that we found that when patients were, it wasn't really just like information that patients seem to appreciate about costs of care. It really was actually a caring relationship of some kind, like a caring response from the clinician. Kind of understand, like they would share a difficult situation, and then having the clinician share, actually, if you scroll down, I think a good place to, we have a, at the very end in the implications for practice section.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, sure.
There's a table with our,
so
going up. It's right above this practice implications, actually.
Okay.
I think it's above the conclusion here.
Okay.
Haha, I keep lying. Keep saying, it's above here.
It's okay.
It's above here.
Yeah. Is it a table, you said?
I thought we had it. Yeah, this is it. Yep.
Okay.
So these were...
Scroll up to the top.
Yeah, exactly. So these were our recommendations based on what we found. Ask questions and be to display curiosity for the complexity of the situation. We have examples of the kinds of questions that could be used. To be kind, to acknowledge emotions. I mean, this stuff looks almost robotic and seems commonsensical, but I think in the moment of a busy, clinicians, one thing I appreciate about our research unit is that there are so many clinicians driving the research that there's a real sympathy for and understanding of that it's a systemic problem and not just the mean doctor's problem. Their schedules are too packed. They're, trying to balance so much. So, it's not that they're being neglectful, but and I think too, sometimes they can lose perspective of where the patient's coming from, like what they do and don't know. And but making opportunities to discuss costs with every patient, because it's not only based on need that patients seem to appreciate talking about costs, but it was, everybody likes to, I like learning about that coupon that's available. That's fantastic. Everybody likes that. You don't have to be in financial distress to appreciate that. So those were some of our recommendations for this particular study. But yeah, I think, again, I would just go back to, I think the best practice is not to approach every conversation with the patient only as about this is a literate deficiency in the patient, but rather this patient needs a caring person to converse with to provide care.
Yeah, wow. And I wonder, I know that one of your co-authors, it looks like in Quebec, right? Did I see that right?
Yeah, Natalie. So she was working alongside me there, and now she's in Quebec in a PhD program. Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah.
And
some of these things I'm looking at, I wonder what we have to have a whole nother, I think, stream to talk about this, but how these implications might be sort of rendered in a Canadian context, because I'm thinking about on the one hand, I mean, just from personal experience, you get in and out, sometimes when you're sort of put in for me, it was a bike accident, and they're like, "Are you good? All right, patch up, get out of here." Hopefully you're fine. But costs, especially, and what.
But that's not a conversation so much in Canada,
right? But and there's but different things that come along with that, with the rate at which time they spend with you, when you're doing that sort of stuff. And I don't know. Yeah, it's fascinating. I think that I'll have to get Jess's opinion on some of this stuff. It's it's very interesting. So, you also shared with me just some stuff, and I know we have a couple of minutes left with you. Some of these more interactive sources. Do you want to say a bit about this one we're looking at now?
Yeah, go ahead and jump into this one.
Okay, so let's get started. Okay.
Yep.
I do that.
So, just throw in an age and say to note everything, just so we can,
I'll say 41. That's not my age. Not yet. But I'll just say, okay, so I'll just say no. Okay. Yep. All right.
So this is a tool that first helps patients to assess what their risk of stroke might be. And so it uses this pictogram to help them because understanding relative and absolute risks are difficult things for people in general, right? It's this really especially in compounding risk, it's kind of difficult. And so it's a little easier to say there will be 99 people who will not have a stroke in 100 people like you, so with your same risk factors, and who are not on a blood thinner over the next 5 years, 99 of those people would not have a stroke. Less than one person with these risk factors would have a stroke, and one person would have a non-disabling stroke. And then if you were to take blood thinners, here's how that risk would change. So first it presents this risk information, and and again, to my point that the tool does not automatically create shared decision-making, the misuse of the tool that me and my collaborators often see is that folks just kind of read the tool at the patient, and instead the ideas of the tool becomes a site of interactivity, and in a way, so like the goal should not only be to present a stroke risk, but it's not just here's your stroke risk, see you later. It should also be, so do you agree that this is a problem you want to act on? Because the patient might decide, I don't want to be on a blood thinner. I don't think that this is enough of a risk of stroke for me to want to take a blood thinner.
Yeah.
Right. So first you have to kind of agree that there's a problem. And then, okay, you agree that there's a problem. You have choices when it comes to anticoagulation. You take warfarin or these newer drugs. And if you hit continue, then it helps. So these are the options for the direct oral anticoagulants. And then here are the issues we can talk about. Which issue do you want to talk about first that fits into your life? And then if you wanted to talk about cost first, that's actually really significant with these medications, the DOACs, the direct oral anticoagulants. They're a lot easier to take routine-wise, but they cost a lot more because the patents are still good on them. So there's no generics out yet that are low in cost, versus warfarin's been around for ages and is extremely low cost. And then, these impact diet changes. They cause diet and medication interactions, and there's a small difference in the risk of bleeding. I only know all these things because I literally watched 300 something videos of visits where the clinician goes over anticoagulation with the patient.
Yeah.
My collaborator and one of my collaborators and I, another postdoc on the project, we're just kind of like this was for a different project than the other ones I've been on. I'm a little more of a data grunt in this one, and I was okay with it. Just reviewed tons of videos and just like did a content analysis of what was going on in the conversation. So I could practically counsel somebody on anticoagulation now. I shouldn't and I wouldn't, but I practically could.
Yeah, if times get dire. Yeah, but I mean, I look how interactive this is in terms of, that's like the key word that just keeps coming back to me is it's, I can look up sort of like that information and my doctors will like share links with me and so forth, but to say this is actually like a decision tree type thing, or it's just constantly asking a question to the patient and saying like, what do you want to talk about first? You have a choice in how you want this to go and what's going to be most useful for you, it seems like.
And what issue matters most for your life. Like part of the goal, shared decision making, is finding a treatment path that makes intellectual, emotional, and practical sense. Because warfarin requires going to a lab to get blood draws on a regular basis to ensure that you're getting the right amount, because it's really sensitive to vitamin K in your diet. Vitamin K is the antidote to it. And so if you eat green leafy vegetables a lot, if you don't eat a consistent amount week to week, it can go too high or too low. And if it's and then that means you're out of the therapeutic range. Either you're at a higher risk of bleeding than you should be, or it's not being protective enough. And so if a patient, that doesn't make practical sense for some patients. Like some patients are homebound and can't get out the door. And if there's no resources for something like a home health aide to come and do the INR testing, then for the warfarin, then that's not the right choice for that patient. And also there were really interesting reasons that patients wanted to remain on warfarin, which, like many clinicians, try to steer patients towards the direct oral anticoagulants. They're a lower risk profile for bleeding. They're seen as easier to manage. And at the same time, sometimes patients like the DOACs, there's no test that tells you it's working. It's just the same dose for everybody, whereas warfarin's titrated. And so some patients like the reassurance of seeing a number and knowing for a fact my warfarin's where it should be. Or they develop a personal relationship. Like there's someone who's retired and doesn't have a lot of family, and they develop a personal relationship, literally multiple people, this is the thing, going to the lab and having the person do their blood draw. This is so Susan, who does this every week for me, and I know all about her kids, and like there's really interesting reasons why they might. And so again, it comes back to that conversation and care and knowing what's best for this individual patient instead of this is the best drug population wise and therefore it's what you should take.
Yeah. Wow. Fascinating. I mean, yeah, we could speak to our peers, in these kind of publications, but we can put it in action through like things like this. This is just fascinating.
And so there's actually a lot of room for there's a lot of service designers who work in healthcare doing stuff kind of similar to this. And like patient education items and all kinds of things. There's actually a lot of designers working in healthcare.
Yeah, that have a good role in, and I mean, even like you sort of got at this with videos, but it's a form of testing too to see like its effectiveness and
exactly. Yep, they would run like an RCT on it, and everything. This is and so they have several decision aids. This is the diabetes one, which was one of the first ones they made. And the issue cards here are, this one's, I'll just issue cards. So first it goes over your choices, and you can either click on them or just continue. And then at the top, you can see those are the issues the patient can choose to make the decision around. So like, if the quality of your sleep is an important consideration for a depression medication, there are a few that either can cause you to be sleepier or cause insomnia, and maybe those are ones to avoid if that's really important in your life.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, I've been so appreciative of all this conversation just about like this work you've been involved with and how you've seen it sort of unfold. With collaborators and so forth. I do work like a little bit after 12:30. How are you doing on time?
I would love to, because I know we had other things to talk about, and I can stay brief, but no, I'm good to stay.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. That's a common thing I think too with these interviews. I get so I'm like, oh, I love talking about this. I keep going. But I just had like about 2 more questions for you, maybe in a different sort of thing, but back to the field of rhetoric and writing and rhetoric and composition, and we'll see if we can like make this all tie together, right? Like regardless of what you're working on, whether it's with the Mayo or however we're thinking about writing context, there's always like room for revision, right? I think that there's always that it's baked into that process, and I know both know that very well. It's what we do when we teach and so forth. And that's one of the things you're working on in addition to these kind of projects and being involved in this. You are working on an ed collection called Revising Moves. And I was just so fascinated by that call. I had to submit to it. I was like, I want to do something on digital media, see what can happen. I wanted to know, because this is still sort of in process, it's difficult to sort of pull up on screen and stuff, but with that press, it's coming out through Utah State.
Yeah.
Correct. Yep. It's about revision and different impacts on work, identities, and everyday lives. I was wondering, like, what you learned as you started getting getting drafts and materials for that project. I'll try to find something that's indicative of what we're talking about with revision. But
one thing we write about in the introduction is that we were imagining initially when we wrote that call that people were going to present artifacts that they revised and talk through them, and that would be like what the collection offered. And we thought and that seems great because there's not enough work on revising in the field generally. There's very little that really actually shows revision like in action happening. But then we were floored by how personal things were, like how much everything was a story that really was coming in. And so, basically these stories took us off the page and into people's lives. And we're like, oh, that's a better place to be. And so we followed our contributors there, and, pushed at folks to enter in. I mean, like, Rich, your piece is a great example of that. Like, you talk about the emotional, affective, like, swells you ride of revising and how it impacts what you're doing and just like colors it. And people told stories about their families and about really personal projects and about, what it meant to them, like for their, professionally and personally, to like revise pieces or not. Like, there's this really arresting piece towards the end. Karen Tellez Trujillo writes about this project that she has been unable to revise, and it really haunts her. She'd conducted these interviews and hadn't been able to like give them their due, and that it's just really haunted her. And she carries this box of stuff from this unfinished project with her from place to place when they move. So we were, just floored by the personal nature of it. And so it turned into a collection of stories. We pushed everyone to like really just embrace story and narrative. I mean, like, we had said narratives before, but like, I think we weren't imagining how much it would really be like story based and story forward. And so, we hadn't had a really preconceived idea, a really strong preconceived idea of where the introduction would go, for instance. And we ended up writing this whole like framing and reviewing all this work on storytelling because it felt right for what ended up being the mode of the collection. And it was so funny. We just had so many like back and forth Zoom meetings where we're like, is this piece about revision? Is it really? Because revision was just so capacious and it was so relational. It was so about everything. And, and it really like challenged us to see revision as not limited to textual change, but as this life activity.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about like literally crying and just like talking to like editors and be like, I don't know, but the collaborators that like are often invisible made their way into like helping me, help me. So as an editor, here's a bit of code you can work with. Here's, a friend who goes, don't send that letter to this editor. Like, if you're upset, like, move it. I don't know if that made it in the final cut, but yeah, I don't think it did. But like, it was just like, okay, how do I try to distill this? But the idea when you all said narratives and then started saying stuff like partial drafts, feedback, like all that, I was like, I have been collecting all this, and like, I hope it's useful to share, just to kind of open the door for people, and say like, this is what's been under the hood, so to say, of a project. And
and I think we originally imagined, people were going to take us on a tour of like these collected artifacts that become a draft. But the tour ended up being what was important. It was that story they wove, and it was like things like the collaborators and people and the places and how this formed their identity and just how this caused a conflict or resolved one, and the political or social upheaval behind the process they're discussing. Like, all of this stuff became so important to what they had to say.
Yes, and I've got a sneak peek at was looking at proofs, and there was even a nice suggestion to gesture to like additional art to works that are also in the collection. So that was a real joy to look at, like Alexandra Hidalgo's piece that's coming out, and additional ones. So I'll just say, like, I'm biased, I know, but like, check it out. It's going to be an awesome collection. Just you can ignore my one, folks. So just, move on to the other. They're very interesting.
We're so excited about the collection. Yeah. We're excited too.
Yeah. And that's this year, right? It's like sometime later this fall?
Yeah. It's sort of. I think so. They haven't given us a date, but I mean, it's in the production process. And I'm hoping they are able to move on it quickly. So
excellent.
We've got like full editorial board approval and everything. We're just, going through the motions of production now.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So one last question for you, Christina, and thanks so much for your time on the stream. What else are you working on right now? Either on your own, collaboratively, things like that. What's going on in your world and the writing world? And
I've got a big long list because they're in different places. Like, I've got a leftovers project. This poor project that deserves better. It just needs to get out the door. It's just been languishing. So one piece is actually a systematic review in healthcare. So systematic review is a particular genre of literature review that's used in STEM fields, and then some social sciences where you build this search strategy, often with the help of a librarian, that pulls sources related to, your criteria, keywords, a date range, particular journals or databases you're going to search. And then you end up with hundreds or even thousands of studies, and then you get a team of researchers together. You define your inclusion and exclusion criteria, and you work through that pile in two waves. The first wave is you only look at titles and abstracts, and you say, what can we definitely throw out? This won't be useful. And what is either definitely in or maybe could be useful, we should be looking at it in the next round of review, which is a full text review. Then you go through the full text review, and that's when you have the PDF. And so you have a much smaller pile. And then you go through again using your same criteria, what's in, what's out. And then you end up with your studies. Traditionally, this was a quantitative thing where you would then, like, if it's a meta-analysis, so there's different forms of this depending on what you do to synthesize your data. There's qualitative versions now too, though. In the qualitative, you might do a thematic analysis then of your results. So ours was very big, probably too big. It should have been more limited, but you learn through doing. It's 81 studies.
Absolutely.
So then we went through and did thematic coding of the results section of all of those studies that were in the final set. And now we're trying to do the synthesis work of reporting on the coding of the results section. So that's one piece of the systematic review, looking at what we term undercared for chronic suffering, which is our umbrella term for patients who have difficult to diagnose and treat conditions, things that are like a little idiopathic or difficult to know the etiology behind, things like chronic pain, chronic fatigue, IBS, Lyme disease, fibromyalgia, things like this that aren't very well understood. And like, you can't like image it to say, this is what you have. So that's one piece. I'm working on a reflection for a special issue of CWPA that's coming out this summer. It's focused on WPAing during the pandemic. And I was 7 months into my position and first time directing writing programs when the pandemic hit. So I have a lot. It was a lot of job to begin with. So I have a lot to say that you all can look forward to reading about this summer.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm also trying to build some longer term projects down the road. So some collaborators and I are talking about potentially building a grant around looking at responses to student writing, and expanding that to looking across disciplines. Like, what kinds of responses to student writing do faculty offer in other disciplines? Do students do anything with responses that we give them? There's some work on this, but a lot of it is older and could use an update. And we think it'd be useful to, get a look at what's really happening. And there's also a grant team that I've joined. We're trying to write an NEH grant to expand the Lucille Schultz archive here at UC, which is this fantastic collection of 19th and 20th century texts and composition, pedagogical texts. And we're writing an NEH grant to expand the archive, further digitize it, making it a little bit more accessible and usable. Right now there's scans up, but, like something more interactive, like maybe that can like sort things on a timeline or geographically, or, with like content tags, things like that. Yeah, like there's some great stuff here, and it just isn't being heavily used yet. I mean, obviously Lucy Schultz, when she built it for her own work, has published on it, but we'd love to see more people make use of it.
Definitely. I mean, I got to help Dr. Russell Durst bring it into like near his office and look through some of them right before I finished up. It was about a year before or so, and that it was online and being scanned. So, if somebody's looking to do a kind of corpus analysis or discourse analysis of a particular text, like this is a great resource and has a lot of very interesting language in different ways. Like Conversations of Savages and, things like that you could really look at like retrospectively. So I think, it's a great collection, even in PDF form. And yeah, that's all the best with that. That would be awesome to see come together.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we're really hoping, and also hoping to be able to expand it to acquire more pieces as well if we were to get the grant funding. So
absolutely, yeah. Sorry, click back here. Oh, I've deleted all my tabs now. But anyways, well, it's been a real pleasure to reconnect. And I know you have some connections to Canada, so we'll have to get you up here sometime for a chat. I think students would love to hear from you, and especially from our liberal arts and professional studies and faculty of health. I'm sure you could pull on a lot of different threads and bring in a lot of different writers. So stay tuned, folks, for that.
Yeah,
but
I am proudly married to a Canadian, so I will. I would love to to come back for a visit.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well,
thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, real joy. I'm glad it worked out, and we had to reschedule at one point because I was gone, and so I appreciate your flexibility. But this is a fantastic conversation, and yeah, we'll speak again soon.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Excellent. All right. Bye.
Bye.
All right, folks. So impressed with the conversation we had today with Dr. Christina LaVecchia. Just going to cut to a 2-minute break, and then I have just a couple announcements about what's coming forth with the last stream and sort of things like that. So yeah, be right back. As always, that self-care when you're in a writing situation, especially if you're glued to your desk in different ways, especially during finals week and so forth. Make sure to take care of yourself. So be right back. Okay, folks, I'm back. Again, big thanks to Dr. Christina LaVecchia for speaking with us about writing and presenting, especially in scientific and medical contexts. A lot we can kind of glean from that conversation and that experience, and those ideas will stay with me as I continue teaching writing and also thinking about revision. I can't wait till that collection comes out. And like I said, a little biased because I'm part of that collection, but I think that it's one that many students and researchers and teachers can be thinking about in terms of like how texts come to be and what kind of moves are necessary for us to get those publications done. So just to close things up, I want to come back to some of the things I mentioned at the top of the hour, and then also how this might fit into things you may be working on, especially if you are a student in the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies, or you are a faculty who's potentially teaching sort of courses like this. So we mentioned a couple different things here. Just as a recap, earlier we mentioned Slides.com as a potential alternative to slide deck software. So if you are thinking about doing a presentation and you want to do it in a more potentially slightly more interactive way through a platform, consider doing this. You've got a lot more customization that you can work with as a result of using Slides.com. And then Adobe Express, we talked about that too. This idea of using these templates to your advantage to start and to deliver a project, again, in the cloud. Because this does not require you to download anything, right, so to say. This might be really useful for rendering some complex ideas for a class presentation, something like that. You can collaborate in different ways on these too, so it makes some of this process a little more fluid, I think, for those of us who don't have access to these costly programs and so forth. So it's really nice that Adobe has made this available for a wide range of folks to use. Okay, so we've got that, and then finally, Headliner. Once again, I have heard of WeVideo. My students have used this. They've also there's so many different sort of CapCut is a big one that people have been using lately in my classes. I should actually pull that up too. CapCut. It's easy to use. All it takes is a sign in, so it does cost something. It costs your information. But just like Headliner, CapCut and other programs allow you to do some multimedia sort of editing and even download versions of it for Windows at no expense, other than you submitting your credentials. So, have a look at these, sort of see what would work for you to deliver them. And also, don't forget to check your syllabus and your requirements to see if you can do these types of things. If you have some flexibility in delivering, let's say, a final presentation, this might be an option to pursue. Okay, and on that note, if you are doing digital compositions in one or more of these forms, probably beyond a slide deck, I would just say, whether it's graphics or hypertext, audio, video, or some kind of programming as a website, you might want to consider asking your professor to nominate you for a digital composition prize. So we are just beginning to let people know again about this competition. And so what this means is any course director in liberal arts and professional studies with our university can nominate one assignment per seminar or up to 2 assignments for larger courses. So if you are part of a class on digital storytelling in the LAPS faculty and you want to be considered, you could ask if a nomination would be acceptable. Now, largely the course directors will make those decisions, but there's nothing wrong with asking after the class is over, would you consider nominating me? I think I've had that happen before. I don't mind it at all. In fact, that just shows me that you're interested in kind of pursuing this for publication. And so what they outline here, and this is a big thanks to John Suffren too, who really led this charge, is you have to include the instructions and so forth. That's what your faculty will do for you, your course director will do for you. And then appropriate hyperlinks. So that's just because the submissions usually live online and we need to make sure that we can access them, right? So they have to work on major browsers and things of that sort. So even if it is like a video, we need to make sure it works upon opening it up. There are other things I mentioned about like copyright and so forth. Typically, we recommend public domain, Creative Commons, or fall under fair use. So there's a lot of things we can kind of get into with that, but generally just make sure you have permission to use the material that you're circulating. So if you're working with sound and a soundtrack or something, you want to make sure that you have permission to use that for educational purposes. And that's what we mean by Creative Commons. If you want to know more about that kind of stuff, I also have previous streams where I've talked about audio and video and how to work with Creative Commons sources. So just look those up in our list of videos, especially on video and audio editing. Okay, so this is coming up, for this next year. Nominations and entries are accepted up through June 19th this year, and it can encompass anything from 2022 to the term that we're ending with right now. And if you're thinking about text-based stuff, look at our Lapse Writing Prize competition that separates these two. We wanted to separate the two just because we found that we're really thinking about ones that are web aware and really taking advantage of multimodal and multimedia forms. So if it is a blog post with hypertext, it might be more fit for that competition. If you have any corner cases, you can always write the department to ask. And so just to give you a sense of what has been composed, we can look just quickly at some past winners. For example, I wasn't on the committee and I was last year, but I was really grateful that one of my students, Dia Deb, who published a piece on the rage of remix. It was for my class, writing in digital cultures. And so they were asked to compose a digital argument using Adobe Spark, which is now Adobe Express. And you can see what it looks like right here. So it was, right on Wix. It was transferred. And you can see here that, she has an audio player layered along with it, like different parts of presenting the information, hyperlinks, case studies, all this kind of different stuff. So if you are designing an argument on a web page and then including media along with it, in addition to hyperlinks, you have a potential submission here, right, that you may want to consider. And so, she worked through this. I was really pleased when I heard that she won in that section. And, we have so many other different sort of submissions that came along the way. And they're all linked here. So do check those out if you want to know sort of what the whole process was like and what kind of submissions are out there to get a sense if these might fit or your work might align with some of these ideas. Okay, so lots of stuff. And the last thing I want to end with, folks, is we have a couple other streams coming up in the next few, really one more, excuse me. So we did one today. We have writing as in composing yourself next week with Carrie Ann Sotavega. So I'll be streaming our interview that's happening later this week and then talking about it. And that will end, folks. So we're in finals week. We're ending the term. And so whatever we want to talk about after that, I am open to it. But this has been a real blast throughout the term, talking with just a wide range of folks about their processes, whether it's been in chat or as a special guest. So you can look forward to that next week, and a kind of so to say celebration of ending this season of streaming. But that's all I have this week, folks. Thanks so much again to Dr. Christina LaVecchia for the conversation, and I'll speak with you all next week. Until then. Bye.